Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And as you can see, I'm in front of my favorite Southern Civil War monument here at Gettysburg National Military Park, at the Virginia State Monument. And one of the reasons why I love this monument so much is because, well, at the base it depicts what are supposed to be average men from Virginia who gave up their careers to join the Army of Northern Virginia and fight for their cause. And up on top, well, personal childhood hero of mine, Robert E. Lee, mounted on his favorite warhorse, Traveler. And I'm using this as the backdrop to the introduction to this episode. For today, I am going to do the fourth installment on what I like to consider the desecration of Southern Civil War history. You know, when Abraham Lincoln gave his second inaugural address, he really did hope for a soft Reconstruction. Using words like, "With malice towards none and charity towards all, let us strive to bind up our nation's wounds." And these sentiments would be echoed 4 years later when General Grant became President of the United States. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but the Christian calendar in year 2023 is the same as it was in 1865. On Palm Sunday, April 2nd, 1865, General A.P. Hill was killed and President Jefferson Davis evacuated Richmond. And exactly 7 days later, on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee would surrender his Army of Northern Virginia. And coincidentally, April 9th, 2023 is also Easter Sunday. So in today's episode, I'm going to be taking a look at the ongoing slaughter of Confederate Civil War history. Well, I did an episode a couple weeks back on the Confederate monument at Arlington National Cemetery and how that is being considered for removal. And I read to you an article in which Lincoln and Grant wanted to allow the South to retain some dignity in the face of their surrender, even though they lost the war, to retain dignity for the Southern people. Unfortunately, the people running Washington today think they know better than Lincoln or Grant when it comes to bringing about and maintaining this healing between North and South. I can honestly tell you, looking at the people running Washington, D.C. today, there are no Lincolns and there are no Grants there. And so today, I'm going to take a look at the proposed, and it looks like it's going to happen, renaming of 9 military bases, all in the South, that are currently named after former Confederate generals, all of them slated to be renamed by the end of 2023. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about something that I've been following for about a week now, and it appears it's a done deal. It's going to happen. The naming committee has recommended to the Department of Defense, and they are going to implement this, the renaming of at least 9 military bases in the South that are named after former Confederate officers. Now, you may recall I did an episode not too long ago up at West Point where the military base up there, the academy, is going to be renaming buildings and streets that are named after General Lee or General Beauregard and General Hardee, and that's pretty much a done deal also. But I just want to point out here that Fort Bragg is going to be the first base apparently to fall. It's going to be the first domino to fall in this nonsense of renaming military bases. And just so we know, Fort Bragg will soon become, if it has not changed already, to Fort Liberty. Down in Georgia, Fort Benning will soon become Fort Moore. Fort Gordon, also in Georgia, will soon become Fort Eisenhower. Okay, I have no objection to a military base being named after five-star general and President Eisenhower. I just wish they would not sacrifice this Confederate name in favor of General Eisenhower. Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia will soon become Fort Walker. Fort Hood in Texas will soon become Fort, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. I'll spell the gentleman's name afterwards. Cavazos. It's spelled Cavazos. And I do apologize for not being able to pronounce that name correctly. I take pride in trying to pronounce people's names correctly. I've never heard the name said. I'm just reading it, and I'm 99% sure I'm really flubbing his name. Fort Lee in Virginia will soon become Fort Gregg Adams, named after two people. Fort Pickett, also in Virginia, will soon become Fort Barfoot. Fort Polk in Louisiana will soon become Fort Johnson. And Fort Rucker in Alabama will soon become Fort Novosel. Now, according to WCBS AM radio, 880 on the AM dial, it's an all-news radio station, they claim that just renaming Fort Bragg alone will cost $6 million. Assuming that all of the other renames, 9 total here that I mentioned, all cost the same $6 million, we are talking about an expense of $54 million taxpayer dollars to rename these forts. To me, a complete waste of money, total nonsense. Okay? But let's look at our government. Probably to you and I, losing 54 cents is no big deal. That's kind of the way these people look at our tax money. $54 million to them is kind of like losing 54 cents to you and I. Now, this naming commission was created towards the tail end of President Trump's presidency, and he vetoed it. However, his veto was overridden. And the current head of the Department of Defense, because ultimately they have really the final decision on this, is a native from Alabama, but apparently has no problem with helping to destroy American Civil War history. Having met a lot of Southerners in my time, to them, the wounds of the Civil War are still fresh, much as it is to Black Americans who feel the same way about slavery. That's why this channel has advocated from day one that we keep monuments from the North, monuments from the South, and start erecting monuments for that third aspect, that third side of the American Civil War, that of the Black Americans. And I will talk about that a little bit more, and I'm sure in future episodes. So this naming commission wants to rename these forts, and it appears it is going to happen. I get a lot of my news from YouTube. This way I'm able to watch news reports from all around the country, and not just around the country, but from all around the world. And I came across a news article by WFSA News 12, and I'm going to assume they were from Tuskegee, Alabama, because the news report was about a monument there erected about 115 years ago by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And they have since been ordered to take that down. I don't know what the current legal status is. This news article appeared about a month ago. And I just want to say that I stand with the Daughters of the Confederacy on keeping this monument. I also want to point out, and I'm sure there's going to be some people who are not going to listen to the second part, I also stand with any organization, regardless of race, who want to erect monuments, markers, and plaques to that third side. If there's any group out there that is planning to erect any kind of monuments, markers, or plaques, and it's within driving distance from me, and it's going to be dedicated to Black Americans during the Civil War, I would love to come and do an episode on that, because that is really the underrepresented group from the American Civil War. So basically, if you want to call me a hypocrite, go right ahead. I'm not. I side with the accurate telling of American Civil War history as best as we can explain it 160 years later. These monuments that people want to tear down are former presidents, Lincoln and Grant, who lived through the Civil War, wanted them up. So as I mentioned, I get a lot of my news from YouTube, and the great thing about YouTube is you can find news from all around the world. I've seen a couple of articles, news clips out of Australia, of all places, that seem to take interest also in the Southern Monument issue. And one recent news clip I saw pointed out something that really needs to be exposed. And that is, a lot of this monument removal started because of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by former police officer Derek Chauvin. Now, I've heard that there was some shenanigans that led up to George Floyd's confrontation with the police. We're not going to get into that now. All I'm going to say is there's nothing George Floyd did to warrant being killed that day, okay? But at the same token, this did not happen in the South. This was in the state of Minnesota. Last time I was at the Gettysburg battlefield, I noticed the monument for the 1st Minnesota, and they were fighting for the Union. So what's upsetting to me is that this terrible incident has been used as the catalyst to do something completely unrelated, okay? And this news article out of Australia pointed out that most of the Confederate monuments on Monument Row in Richmond came down almost in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd murder. Now, as I mentioned before, I have reached out to the mayor of Richmond, and it's been 3 months now, more than 3 months since I reached out to him, and no response. He doesn't want to talk about why they did what they did in Richmond, but it's pretty sad that the Confederate capital, the second and longest Confederate capital, you go down there and there's really no history of the Confederacy anymore. We are destroying our own history, and apparently we're allowing it to happen. Now, there are people out there, like I said, who will probably call me racist and all that, and well, it's fine. You can say whatever you want. You're 100% wrong, because I am not so much pro-Confederate, even though I support some of the aspects of what the Confederacy fought for. I'm also pro-Union, and I'm also pro-Black American who fought or did what they could during the American Civil War. In other words, I'm simply trying to say I am a supporter of the accurate telling of American Civil War history. And all of it needs to be preserved, researched, written about. I want to thank you for watching. For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Until next time, please, please help keep American Civil War history alive. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.